The email that ruined my life arrived at 2 a.m., but the foundation for my revenge was built years before that. I was the only person in the world who understood the code that ran Nexo's dynamics. I didn't just manage the system, I birthed it. They called it the Ghost Bridge. It was a digital infrastructure that allowed billions of dollars to travel across borders without a single second of delay. To the bankers, it was magic. To me, it was just elegant architecture. My name is Torian Reeves. I am 34 years old, a chief code architect, and a father. Until that Tuesday, I thought my loyalty to the company meant something. I thought being the guy who saved the servers at midnight and skipped holidays to patch security flaws made me valuable. I was wrong. To them, I was just a piece of expensive hardware that could be discarded the moment I malfunctioned. It was a Tuesday when everything fell apart. I wasn't at my desk. I wasn't in the server room. I was standing in a sterile, white hallway at St. Jude's Heart Institute, watching nurses run toward my daughter's room. The Ghost Bridge was humming along perfectly, processing trades worth more than the GDP of small countries. But my personal world was crashing down. I didn't know it yet, but the man signing my paychecks was about to force me to choose between my job and my daughter's life. The sound of a heart monitor flatlining is something you never forget. It sits in your nightmares forever. My daughter, Ivy, was only 3 days old. She was born with a rare valve defect that the ultrasounds had missed. 1 minute she was sleeping in the bassinet, and the next, her skin turned a terrifying shade of blue. We were rushed to the NICU, surrounded by a team of specialists who spoke in rapid, hushed tones. "Code Blue, room 404, the intercom announced. That was us. That was my baby. I stood pressed against the glass wall, my hands shaking so hard I couldn't clasp them together. My wife was still in the maternity ward, recovering from the C-section, so I was facing this terror alone. The doctors were working frantically over Ivy's tiny chest. Every second felt like an hour. The air smelled of antiseptic and fear. I felt completely useless. I was a man who could fix million-dollar code errors in seconds, but I couldn't fix my daughter's heart. The lead surgeon turned to me, his eyes serious above his mask. "We need to operate immediately, Mr. Reeves. Her valve is failing. We are prepping the theater now." I nodded, unable to speak. My entire universe narrowed down to that tiny, struggling life in the incubator. Nothing else mattered. Not money, not code, and certainly not Nexo's dynamics. I was just a terrified father praying for a miracle. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a jarring, angry sound in the quiet hallway. I ignored it. It buzzed again, and again. Finally, I pulled it out, thinking it might be my wife calling for an update. It wasn't. The screen flashed the name, Silas Cragg. My stomach tightened. Silas was the new CEO of Nexo's Dynamics, a man who had inherited his position and treated employees like furniture. He never called unless he wanted to scream at someone. I answered, keeping my voice low. "Silas, I can't talk right now. I'm at the hospital. My daughter." "I don't care where you are," Silas interrupted, his voice loud enough that I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "The Ghost Bridge is lagging. We have a 0.4-second latency spike. The Hong Kong conglomerate is threatening to pull the deal if the transfer isn't instant. Fix it." I stared at the phone in disbelief. "Silas, did you hear me? My newborn is going into emergency surgery. She stopped breathing 10 minutes ago. I am signing consent forms right now. And I am trying to close a $4 billion merger." Silas shouted. "I don't pay you to have personal problems, Torian. I pay you to keep my system running. Log in. Now." I looked through the glass. The nurses were wheeling Ivy's incubator toward the surgical wing. "I can't," I said, my voice cracking. "I have to be here." The line went silent for a second, and I thought maybe, just maybe, he had found a shred of humanity. I was wrong. When Silas spoke again, his voice was dangerously calm. It was the voice of a man who enjoyed holding power over others. "Listen to me very closely, Torian," he said. "If that latency isn't fixed in the next 10 minutes, I am triggering the gross negligence clause in your contract." My blood ran cold. "You can't do that." "I can, and I will," he hissed. "I will fire you for cause. And you know what happens then? Your company benefits terminate effective immediately. Midnight tonight. That platinum tier health insurance paying for your daughter's heart surgery? Gone. You'll be paying for this operation out of pocket. Do you have $200,000 lying around, Torian? The threat hung in the air like a guillotine. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew Ivy needed that insurance to survive the night. He was holding a gun to my baby's head and demanding I write code. Please, I whispered, feeling tears sting my eyes. Just give me 24 hours. I'll fix it after the surgery. 10 minutes, Silas said. Or I call HR and cancel your policy. Make your choice. Be a father or be unemployed and bankrupt. Tick-tock. I froze. Time seemed to stop. I looked at the double doors where my daughter had just disappeared. I looked at the phone in my hand. The rage that filled me wasn't hot or fiery. It was ice cold. It started in my chest and spread to my fingertips, numbing the shaking, steadying my breathing. In that moment, my respect for Nexo's dynamics died. My loyalty evaporated. I realized I wasn't talking to a boss. I was talking to a monster. Silas Cragg thought he had broken me. He thought I was panicking. But he had made a fatal mistake. He had pushed the only man who knew where the bodies were buried. He forced me into a corner, and he forgot that a cornered animal bites. Understood, I said. My voice was flat, devoid of emotion. I'm logging in now. Good choice, Silas sneered, mistaking my calm for submission. Don't make me wait. I hung up. I walked 5 steps down the hallway to a plastic bench. I sat down and opened my laptop. The glow of the screen illuminated my face. I wasn't just going to fix the latency. I was going to ensure that Silas Cragg would regret this phone call for the rest of his miserable life. I cracked my knuckles, took a deep breath of the antiseptic air, and typed in my administrative password. The architect was in, and the demolition was just beginning. I logged into the mainframe, my fingers flying across the keyboard. The hospital sounds faded away, replaced by the hum of the hard drive. I navigated to the sector where the latency spike was originating. I expected to find a sloppy line of code or a memory leak, standard errors that happen when systems grow too fast. But as I dug into the hidden layers of the kernel, the math didn't add up. The data wasn't getting stuck, it was being rerouted. I opened the subprocesses and gasped. There it was, a hidden subroutine labeled Phantom_7. It wasn't an optimization tool. It was a skim script. Silas had programmed the system to shave fractions of a penny microcents off every single transaction and divert them into an encrypted offshore shell account. It was the classic salami slicing fraud, but on a massive global scale. The latency wasn't a bug. It was the weight of the theft slowing down the bridge. Silas Cragg wasn't just a cruel boss. He was a criminal. He was embezzling millions right under the noses of the Hong Kong investors he was trying to impress. I sat there in the hallway, stunned. If I reported this now, the investigation would freeze the accounts, the company would lock down, and my insurance would be voided before Ivy's surgery was done. Silas had me trapped. But as I stared at the theft script, I realized he had just handed me the keys to his destruction. I had to make a split-second choice. If I deleted the skim script to fix the speed, Silas would know I found it. He would fire me instantly to cover his tracks. So, I did something dangerous. I left the theft script running. I optimized the surrounding traffic protocols, rewriting the compression algorithms to force the data through faster. It masked the drag caused by his embezzlement. To Silas, it would look like the problem was solved. But I wasn't done. While I was deep in the root access, I wrote my own script. I called it the dependency chain. I buried it deep in the system's startup kernel, where no standard audit would ever look. I linked the entire Ghost Bridge operation to a digital handshake from my personal, encrypted home server. The command was simple. Every 24 hours, the Nexo system would ping my private server for an authorization token. As long as my status in the HR database remained active, my server would reply and the bridge would function. If my status changed, if I was fired or removed, my server would deny the handshake. I typed the final line of code and pressed enter. I hadn't just fixed the system. I had put a kill switch on it. Silas wanted the code. Fine. But he didn't know that the engine now required my heartbeat to run. Done, I whispered, closing the laptop with a snap. The timing was almost supernatural. At that exact moment, The double doors at the end of the sterile hallway swung open. The lead surgeon stepped out, pulling his mask down around his neck. He looked exhausted, sweat beading on his forehead. I stood up so fast my chair scraped loudly against the floor. My heart was hammering against my ribs, harder than it had during the showdown with Silas. "Mr. Reeves?" the surgeon asked. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I gripped the laptop bag like a lifeline. "She made it," he said, a tired smile touching his lips. "The valve repair was successful. Her oxygen levels are stabilizing, and her heart rate is normal. She's a fighter, your daughter." I let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in my lungs for a lifetime. My knees actually buckled, and I had to grab the wall to keep from sliding down. Ivy was going to live. The insurance was safe for tonight. Silas Cragg's threats were powerless now. I looked down at the laptop in my hand. Inside that metal casing was the weapon that would eventually destroy the man who threatened my child. I had saved my daughter, and without Silas knowing it, I had just set the trap that would end him. 2 weeks flew by in a blur of recovery and relief. Ivy was discharged from the NICU, tiny but pink-cheeked and healthy. My wife and I were living in that exhausted, happy bubble of newborns, night feedings, diaper changes, and soft crying. For a moment, life felt almost normal. I went back to work, keeping my head down. At Nexo's Dynamics, the atmosphere was deceptively calm. The Ghost Bridge was running faster than it ever had, thanks to my optimization. The Hong Kong deal went through without a hitch, bringing in billions in new capital. Silas Cragg was walking around the office like a king, soaking up the praise. I saw him in the break room once. He didn't ask about Ivy. He didn't apologize for the ultimatum. He looked right through me, as if I were part of the drywall. He was boasting to the board members about his efficient leadership and robust infrastructure. He had absolutely no idea that the only reason the system was running was because my employee ID was still active in the database, allowing the daily handshake to pass through. He thought he had won. He thought I was just a compliant worker bee who had learned his lesson. He was so arrogant that he didn't even bother to check the locks on the house he thought he owned. The summons came on a Thursday afternoon, right before the weekend rush. "Cragg wants to see you," his executive assistant said, refusing to meet my eyes. That was the first sign. I walked into the corner office with the panoramic view of the city. Silas was sitting behind his massive mahogany desk, looking bored. There was a thin man in a cheap suit standing next to him. "Sit," Silas commanded, pointing to a chair. I sat. I kept my face blank. "Torian, we've been reviewing the quarterly budget," Silas began, not even looking up from his tablet. "The Hong Kong merger means we need to trim the fat. We're restructuring the IT department." He gestured to the thin man. "This is the representative from Viper Solutions. They're an overseas firm. Much more cost-effective." I stared at him. "You're outsourcing the core architecture?" "After I saved the deal." Silas smirked, a cruel, satisfied look. "The code is running perfectly, Torian. It's self-sustaining. We don't need an expensive architect to watch a machine that works flawlessly. We own your work. We own the code. So we don't need you." He slid a paper across the desk. "Pack your box. Security will escort you out. Your access is revoked effective immediately." He thought he was cutting costs. He didn't realize he was cutting the wire to his own parachute. "Understood," I said, standing up. I didn't fight. I didn't beg. I just walked out, knowing that tomorrow morning, the silence would be deafening. I didn't cause a scene. That's what Silas wanted. He wanted me to beg, to scream, to make him feel powerful. Instead, I stood up slowly and placed my security badge on the corner of his desk. The plastic clicked against the glass surface, a sound that seemed echoing in the sudden silence. The representative from Viper Solutions shifted uncomfortably, but Silas just leaned back, a smug grin plastered on his face. He thought he was the smartest man in the room. "We own your code, Reeves," Silas sneered, picking up the badge and tossing it into the trash can like a used napkin. "Every line, every algorithm, every keystroke. Don't think about taking any intellectual property with you. We have lawyers who will bury you if you even look at a line of code that resembles ours." I paused at the door, my hand on the handle. I looked back at him, memorizing the arrogance on his face. "I wouldn't dream of taking anything, Silas," I said, my voice calm and steady. The code is all yours. Every single bit of it. I hope it serves you as well as you've treated me." Silas laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Get out." I walked through the bullpen of desks, ignoring the confused looks from my former team. They didn't know yet. They didn't know that the captain had just been thrown overboard, and the ship was steering straight into an iceberg. I walked out into the sunshine, took a deep breath of fresh air, and smiled. The countdown had officially begun. The drive home was the most peaceful commute of my life. For the first time in 5 years, I didn't have to worry about server loads or latency spikes. I stopped at a grocery store and bought a celebratory steak and a bottle of wine. When I got home, my wife looked worried when she saw me at 2 p.m., but I just kissed her and picked up Ivy. Holding my daughter, feeling her tiny heart beat strong and steady against my chest, grounded me. That evening, I didn't frantically look for new jobs. I went into my garage, cleared off my workbench, and set up a new server rack. I taped a piece of paper to the wall. On it, I wrote 2 words, Aegis Prime. It was the start of my new consultancy firm. Later, I opened the severance package Silas had emailed to my personal account. It was insulting. 2 weeks of pay and a non-compete clause so restrictive it practically forbade me from touching a computer for 2 years. I laughed and deleted the email without signing a thing. I didn't need his money. And his non-compete clause wouldn't matter in 24 hours because there wouldn't be a company left to compete with. I spent the rest of the night playing with Ivy, waiting for the clock to tick down. I slept like a baby, knowing that across town, a digital bomb was ticking. The next morning, I poured my coffee at 8:59 a.m. and sat in front of my personal server monitors in the garage. This was the moment of truth. The dependency chain I had installed was simple but ruthless. Every morning at 9 a.m. sharp, the Nexos Dynamics mainframe initiated a system check. It would reach out across the internet to my encrypted server and request a handshake, a digital token confirming that the chief code architect was still listed as an active employee in the HR database. At 9 a.m. on the dot, the request came in. My screen blinked green. Incoming connection request, Nexos_ghost_bridge. I watched as my server processed the request. It queried the HR database ID I had embedded. Yesterday, that ID returned active. Today, because Silas had formally processed my termination to cut off my insurance, the ID returned terminated. My server followed its programming perfectly. It rejected the handshake. The screen flashed red, access denied. Token revoked. I took a sip of my coffee. It was the best cup I'd ever tasted. Miles away, inside the Nexos server room, the ghost bridge was receiving the rejection. Without that token, the dependency chain interpreted the system as compromised. It executed the lockdown protocol immediately. The invisible heartbeat that kept the billions flowing had just stopped beating. Silas Cragg had wanted full ownership of the system. Now, he was about to find out exactly what that cost. I didn't need to be in the building to know what was happening. I could see the chaos on the news feeds within minutes. The ghost bridge didn't just slow down. It slammed shut like a steel vault. $40 billion in international trades, money from banks, governments, and massive corporations, froze in midair. It was a financial heart attack. In my mind, I pictured the scene at Nexos. The massive wall of monitors in the network operations center, usually a calming flow of green data streams, would have turned a violent, flashing red. The alarms would be blaring, a deafening screech that signaled catastrophic failure. The support phones would be lighting up instantly, thousands of angry clients demanding to know where their money was. And on every single administrative screen, from the intern's laptop to the massive display in the boardroom, a single error message would be pulsing. Critical system failure. Architect key missing. Contact system administrator. Silas would be staring at that message right now. He would be seeing the words architect key and realizing, with a sinking feeling in his gut, that he had thrown away the only person who held that key. The billions he was so proud of securing were now trapped in a digital limbo, unreachable and untouchable. He had fired the locksmith and then locked himself out of the house. The panic at Nexos must have been absolute. I checked my old team's group chat. I was still lurking in it, though I couldn't post. The messages were frantic. Everything is down. Who has the key? Silas is screaming. Silas, in his arrogance, turned to his new, cheap saviors, Viper Solutions. He likely screamed at them to hack it or override the code. I could imagine the Viper team sweating in their cheap suits, typing furiously, trying to bypass my security protocols. But the Ghost Bridge was my masterpiece. It wasn't built to be hacked. It was built to defend itself. As Viper Solutions tried to brute force their way past the architect key requirement, my secondary defenses kicked in. The system interpreted their clumsy attempts as a hostile cyber attack. Instead of opening, the system doubled down. It encrypted the data vaults with a 256-bit rotating key, locking the assets even tighter. Every time Viper tried to break in, the system added another layer of digital concrete. They were making it worse by the second. Silas was watching his empire crumble, and the people he hired to save money were costing him billions. He had replaced a surgeon with a butcher, and now the patient was bleeding out on the table. My phone sat silently on the desk next to me. I knew it was only a matter of time before it rang. The inevitable happened at 10:15 a.m. I was sitting in the nursery, the morning sun streaming through the blinds, holding Ivy. It was feeding time. The house was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos I knew was consuming Nexo's dynamics. The only sound was Ivy's rhythmic breathing and the soft chirping of birds outside. Then, my phone buzzed on the side table. It vibrated violently, dancing across the wood. I glanced at the screen. Silas Cragg. A week ago, that name would have sent a spike of cortisol through my veins. It would have made me jump up, apologize to my wife, and rush to a laptop. But today I didn't move. I kept the bottle steady for my daughter. I looked at her tiny hand wrapping around my finger. She was the priority. She always should have been. The phone rang until it went to voicemail. Then it started ringing again immediately. Silas wasn't just calling, he was panic dialing. He was realizing that his cost-effective, offshore team couldn't fix a system they didn't understand. He needed the architect. He needed the man he had thrown in the trash. I let it ring. I finished feeding Ivy, burped her gently, and laid her back in her crib. Only then, after she was asleep and safe, did I pick up the phone. I didn't call him back. I just checked the notifications. 12 missed calls. And one long voicemail. I walked into the kitchen and pressed play on the voicemail, putting it on speaker so my wife could hear the man who tried to bankrupt us. Silas's voice filled the room, but it wasn't the smooth, arrogant baritone of the boardroom. It was shrill. It was shaking with rage. Reeves, I know you're there. Pick up the phone. The system is locked. What did you do? You sabotaged us. There was a pause, and I heard him slamming his hand against something hard. I have lawyers drafting a lawsuit right now for cyber terrorism. You hear me? I will have you arrested. I will take your house, your car, and every dime you have. You think this is funny? You're destroying $1 billion company. Call me back within 5 minutes and unlock this system, or I swear to God, I will ruin your life. The message ended. My wife looked at me, eyes wide. Can he do that? I smiled calmly. No, he can't. Because I didn't sabotage anything. I built a security feature. He just tripped the alarm. Silas was making the mistake all bullies make, assuming that screaming louder fixes the problem. He was trying to frame my competence as a crime. But I had anticipated this. I hadn't planted a virus. I had installed a lock. And he was the one who threw away the key. I didn't respond to Silas directly. Instead, I called my lawyer, a sharp woman named Veronica, who specialized in intellectual property disputes. We had prepared for this moment. Within the hour, she sent a formal legal letter to the Nexo's Dynamics Board of Directors and their legal counsel. The letter was a masterpiece of corporate speak. It read, Mr. Reeves denies all allegations of sabotage. The Ghost Bridge system is designed with a high-level security protocol known as the architect's dependency. This protocol requires a daily cryptographic authorization from the chief code architect to prevent external hijacking or unauthorized use. This is a standard safety feature for financial systems handling billions in assets. The kicker was the final paragraph. By terminating Mr. Reeves's employment and revoking his active status in the HR database, Nexo's Dynamics voluntarily triggered this security lockdown. The system is functioning exactly as designed to protect client assets from unauthorized personnel. You fired the only person with the security clearance to authorize daily operations. It was the perfect defense. I hadn't broken the system. They had. They had fired the pilot in midair and were now blaming him for the plane crashing. The ball was back in their court. They could sue me, sure, but in court, I would explain that I built the lock to keep their money safe, and that they were too incompetent to understand their own software. 2 hours later, my phone rang again. It wasn't Silas this time. It was his personal assistant. Her voice was trembling. "Mr. Reeves? Mr. Cragg would like to meet. In person. Neutral ground. The coffee shop on 5th and Main. 30 minutes. I agreed. I put on my best suit, not the frumpy hoodies I used to wear to the office, but a sharp, tailored jacket. I wanted to look like a consultant, not an employee. When I walked into the coffee shop, Silas was already there. He looked wrecked. His tie was crooked, his hair was messy, and he was sweating. He looked like a man who had stared into the abyss and blinked. I sat down opposite him. "Hello, Silas." "Give me the key," he hissed, leaning over the table. "Unlock it. Now." "I don't work for you anymore," I said calmly. "I'm an independent consultant. My company is called Aegis Prime." I slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a contract. "If you want my services to restore your system, here are my terms. My rate is $50,000 per hour. 4-hour minimum. Payment up front." Silas stared at the paper like it was toxic waste. "You're insane. I'm not paying you 200 grand to fix your own mess." "Then the money stays frozen," I said, leaning back. "And those Hong Kong investors? They'll walk by tomorrow morning." Silas turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. He stood up, knocking his chair back, drawing stares from the other patrons. His arrogance was battling his desperation, and arrogance was winning. He couldn't stomach the idea of paying me, the employee he had discarded, a fortune to save him. "I won't sign that," Silas spat. "I don't need you. Viper Solutions is close to cracking it. They told me they're almost through the firewall." I almost laughed. If Viper told him that, they were lying to buy time. If they try to force the firewall again, the encryption rotates. You'll lose the data permanently. "You're bluffing," Silas growled. "You're trying to extort me." "Well, it's not going to work. I'm calling the FBI. I'm going to have them raid your house, seize your servers, and throw you in a cell for corporate espionage. You want to play hardball, Torian? Let's see how tough you are when the feds kick down your door." He stormed out of the coffee shop, grabbing his phone as he went. He thought the threat of the FBI would break me. He thought I would panic and give him the key to avoid prison. But he had forgotten one crucial detail. The key didn't just lock the system. It protected the secrets buried inside it. By calling the FBI, Silas wasn't sending them after me. He was inviting them to find the skeletons in his own closet. And I had the map. I waited until I was back in my car before I made my final move. Silas was probably halfway to his office, screaming at his lawyers to get a warrant for my arrest. He thought he was playing a power game, but he didn't realize he was standing on a landmine. I opened my laptop one last time and composed a single email. The subject line was simple, the skim script. I attached a file, a small, encrypted packet of data. In the body of the email, I wrote, "Silas, you want to call the FBI? Go ahead. But you should know what the architect key actually does. It doesn't just run the bridge. It encrypts the daily logs of the subroutine Phantom _7. You know the one, the script stealing fractions of pennies from every client transaction." I hit send. Right now, the system is locked down. That means the skim script is frozen in mid-execution, plainly visible in the code stack. If the FBI seizes those servers and forensic accountants look at the source code, they won't just find a crash. They will find proof of grand larceny and wire fraud. You can't hire Viper Solutions to delete it because the drive is encrypted by my key. You are trapped. If you call the police, you go to prison. If you don't buy the key, you go bankrupt. Your move. I didn't hear from Silas again. There were no more threatening voicemails. No lawyers serving papers at my door. No FBI raid. The silence was absolute, and it told me everything I needed to know. Silas had opened the email. He had seen the proof. He realized that in his greed, he had handed me the murder weapon. He was checkmated. He couldn't fix the system without me, but he couldn't let anyone look at the system closely without exposing his crime. He was held hostage by his own corruption. While he sat in his office, paralyzed by fear, the clock kept ticking. The Hong Kong conglomerate didn't wait. When the markets opened in Asia and their funds were still frozen, they issued a public statement condemning Nexo's dynamics for incompetence. The stock price, which had been climbing all week, fell off a cliff. It dropped 15% in an hour, then 30%. Rumors started swirling that the company was insolvent. Silas couldn't defend himself because any explanation would lead back to the fraud. He just had to sit there and watch his empire burn, knowing that the only fire extinguisher in the world was sitting in the garage of the man he had fired for having a sick child. While Nexo's was burning, I was building. I didn't wait for Silas to surrender. I went on the offensive. I found the direct contact information for the CTO of the Hong Kong conglomerate. I sent him a professional, concise message. I didn't mention the fraud. That was my insurance, not my sales pitch. Instead, I told him the truth about the architecture. The Nexo system is unstable because it relies on outdated leadership, I explained. I am the original architect of the Ghost Bridge. My new firm, Aegis Prime, can build a secure, independent infrastructure for your transfers within 48 hours. We prioritize security and transparency. They were desperate. They had billions in limbo. They replied within 10 minutes. I got on a video call, explained my credentials, and showed them a demo on my private server. They were impressed. But more importantly, they were furious at Nexo's. By the end of the call, they had verbally agreed to move their entire contract to Aegis Prime the moment they could legally extract their assets. The dominoes began to fall. Other clients, seeing the Hong Kong giant leave, started contacting me too. I wasn't just stealing Silas's clients. I was rescuing them from a sinking ship. The end of Nexo's dynamics came swiftly. With the Ghost Bridge locked and billions frozen, the board of directors faced immediate insolvency. They fired Silas Cragg for gross mismanagement, but that didn't solve the problem. They still couldn't access the money. They were staring down the barrel of federal lawsuits that would bankrupt them all personally. They needed a savior, and they knew there was only one person with the key. That's when I made my move. I contacted the board with a simple offer. I would buy the entire Nexo's infrastructure for pennies on the dollar. In exchange, I would use my key to unlock the system and release the frozen assets, saving them from the lawsuits. It was a hostile takeover disguised as a rescue mission. They had no choice. They signed the papers in a panic. The moment the electronic signature cleared, transferring ownership to Aegis Prime, I typed in the command from my laptop. The architect key was accepted. The system unlocked. The frozen billions were released and processed instantly. The lawsuits evaporated. I didn't just win. I bought the battlefield and the army. Silas Cragg fled to a non-extradition country, leaving behind a legacy of ash, while I walked away with the kingdom. 1 year later, the sun was shining on the glass facade of the building that used to be Nexo's dynamics. I stood in the parking lot, shielding my eyes from the glare. In my arms, Ivy was wiggling, pointing a chubby finger at the sky. She was 1 year old today, healthy, happy, and completely unaware that her heart had been the catalyst for a revolution. "Look, Ivy," I whispered, pointing up. A massive crane was lowering a new sign onto the roof. The blue and silver letters gleamed in the sunlight, Aegis Prime. It was my company, my building, my code. I walked inside, greeting the security guard, Noah, the same guy who had been forced to escort me out a year ago. He smiled and tipped his hat. "Morning, Mr. Reeves. Good to see you." "Good to see you, Noah." I walked to the elevator, but before I went up to the penthouse office that used to belong to Silas, I stopped at the basement service entrance. I wanted to check one final detail. I walked down the concrete ramp to the loading dock. There, screwed into the wall next to the mop buckets and cleaning supplies, was a small, rusted plaque I had ordered personally. It read, "Nexo's Dynamics, Janitorial Supply Closet." I smiled, kissed Ivy on the forehead, and headed upstairs to get to work. The logo had changed, but more importantly, the values had too. We didn't just build bridges anymore. We built them with a heart.